Victory or death! Victory or death!
Surely this movie represents the ultimate nerdist fantasy, doesn't it? A big old middle finger to those people throughout our lives. The parents, the significant others, the nurse at the old people's home that insists that your favourite hobby is a big old waste of time. Playing games. How can it be? What if this game is actually a recruitment programme for an alien race for me to become a warrior in an ancient war? They're going to scoop me up, covered in sweat and kettle crisp crumbs, and turn me into Luke Skywalker because I finished Star Fox without dying once in 1993. Sure, I'm not sure if that really works if you're playing, say, Chris Kamara's Street Soccer on the PlayStation 1 or A Dog's Life on PlayStation 2. But let's not split hairs here. It's a fantasy concept that has enthralled from Generation X to Generation Z. And despite its relative lack of success in the cinema, Last StarFighter's cult classic status keeps seeing potential sequels and remakes, both cinematic and TV based, mooted as potential ideas for money spinning. Original screenwriter Jonathan R. Betuel was reticent for The Last StarFighter to take to the stars once again, despite badgering from the likes of Seth Rogen, Steven Spielberg, and UK games journalist alumni turned Rogue One screenwriter Gary Whitta. He's made several attempts to get this moved along, has our Gary. However, it looks like in March 2021, courtesy of Whitta's Twitters, that some genuine progress had been made on this. But that's a long time ago now. We're in 2024. Will a sequel happen to The Last StarFighter? Who knows? I'd say the best bet for it happening is if Spielberg feels like following up his movie adaptation of Ready Player One with another of Ernest Cline's other novels, that being Armada. Trust me, it's basically the same story as The Last StarFighter. But why should you care if there's a sequel? I can see why you wouldn't. There's enough going on in the world right now, but as you clicked on this video, you probably do want to hear about it. So, The Last StarFighter was a 1984 movie distributed by Universal Pictures that was directed by Nick Castle, who also directed The Boy Who Could Fly and Dennis the Menace. No, the American one, not the one with Nasher and Walter the Softie. Nick is perhaps more famous as an actor than a director, as he played one of the most iconic figures on the silver screen, that being Michael Myers in the original Halloween, as well as appearing as Michael in the recent trio of sequels. Last StarFighter is one of the very first movies, along with fellow video game-inspired effort Tron, to use CGI in large amounts to depict the cosmic war in the movie's second half. Teenager Alex Rogan is having a decidedly early existentialist crisis in the trailer park he resides in with his mum and brother Lewis. Having failed to gain a scholarship, Alex wastes time on a mysterious arcade first-person space shoot-'em-up called Starfighter. It's not long until Alex's practice pays off and he finds himself atop of the score table, and also finds himself at the attention of a mysterious man called Centauri. Centauri invites him into his posh car, claiming to be the game's inventor. Now, children, listen really closely to this. If an old man in a posh car invites you into his car saying he's impressed with your wrist action, please do not get in. Or do, as he might be an alien recruiting pilots for an intergalactic conflict, a real one, between the Ryland Star League and the Kodan Empire. You see, the cabinet was indeed this. It was a tool to filter out people who are really good at games, like Mike Matei or One Credit Classics, as opposed to people like me and Douglas Titchmarsh who aren't very good at games. Yeah, well, I might not be good at games, but at least I won't die in flames in the inky black nothingness of cold space millions of light years away from home, he mithered sourly. Can Alex prove himself to be a top gunner for the Ryland Star League with his partner Grig? Yes, obviously. This isn't some sort of miserable Mike Lee kitchen drama with reptilian space co-pilots. Of course he wins at the end. That's not a spoiler. Well, it is, but it's not. Lance Guest, who played Alex, has had a long career in Hollywood, with appearances in renowned shows like St. Elsewhere, X-Files, Dallas, House, Jag and NYPD Blue. He also had roles in Jaws the Revenge and Halloween 2, getting attacked by the same character his director played, but not actually him, because he wasn't in Halloween 2. Centauri was played by Robert Preston, in a role specifically written for him. It proved to be his final major cinematic role in a long career dating back to the 1930s. Under the makeup of Grigg was Dan O'Herlihy, who was in Halloween 3. What is it with all these people and Halloween films? But yes, he was most known to you and I as being the old man in the first 2 RoboCop movies. That's the old CEO of the company, isn't it? The Last StarFighter has a score of 76% based on 86 reviews on review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes. While it had a dismal return of just $29 million from its initial $15 million outlay, Last StarFighter has gained a strong cult following since its home media release. I mean, there can't be many poorly performing cinematic releases that have spawned an off-Broadway musical show, but bloody Last StarFighter has, hasn't it? On to the games, and well, this is where it gets a bit complicated. Officially, we only have one video game, that being the one we're going to cover today on the NES. There were plans for Atari to release the arcade from the movie shortly after the movie came out that was filled with battle scenes from the film. It was even going to use the same yoke mould as the previous Star Wars cabinet, and was going to run on the same Motorola 6800 processing engine as your dear old Amiga or your Mega Drive. However, Atari bigwigs watched the film before release and did not think it was going to be a massive success. See, Atari weren't completely useless businessmen in the early 1980s. They just... well, they were, weren't they? This probably is the reason that the Atari 2600 and the Atari 5200 versions, along with the 8-bit Atari computer versions, were abandoned like unwanted dogs in the woods as well. Although in this case, the dogs weren't abandoned in the woods, they just had their identities changed and rehomed. The already developed console versions were rebranded as Solaris, whereas the computer versions came out with some minor changes under the auspices of Star Raiders 2. Some industrious youths called Rogue Synapse set out to recreate that original arcade game, though, from the film, using sound effects and music from the movie in 2007. It's pretty faithful to the film and can be downloaded in a link I'll provide below. They even built a working cabinet of the machine. If you see it, get on it. You never know, Rogue Synapse might actually be an alien space pilot recruitment team. I mean, they could be. They're not. And what of the actual proper officially released game developed by Graph Gold and published by Mindscape in the summer of 1990, some 6 years after the movie came out? One would imagine that the license probably was a little bit cheaper at that point. Well, it probably looks familiar if you're a fan of 8-bit computer games. Yes, as you have identified probably by now, this is Iridium. Yes, indeed, a tarted up Iridium with a different title screen, sprites and music, but it's still Iridium. Iridium, for the uninitiated, was a critical darling commercial hit in 1986 for Hewson Consultants when it was released on the Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum, with releases later coming out on the Amstrad CPC, MS-DOS, Amiga, BBC Micro and Atari ST. As you can see, it is very, very similar indeed to the Last StarFighter on the NES. Graph Gold programmed the original title too, so if you wanted to port Iridium over to the NES, there's probably no finer folk to do so. The honour of that programming and porting over to the NES fell to Nick Eastridge, who ported this all by himself. He was a programmer also on WWF King of the Ring on the NES and Ren and Stimpy Vidiots. In Iridium, and indeed the Last StarFighter, you're placed in the cockpit of a spaceship and you must face the challenge of an encroaching battalion of 15 bloody big dreadnoughts that are coming into your territory and causing all kinds of fuss. They're each accompanied by a factillion-strong armada of smaller ships, and you, as the only pilot who turned up at work that day, must take them on alone. Each of the dreadnoughts represents a horizontally scrolling level, and you must scooch along the top of each, causing damage and taking out the fighters. You can accelerate and decelerate, swoop backwards to take out annoying turrets and craft that you might have missed on your first run, and generally acts as a bit of an annoying deadly gnat upon the back of these great Star Destroyer style Uber vehicle beasts. Once you've acted enough of a rascal, you'll render the ship safe enough for you to land near its control centre at the rear of the vehicle. You'll automatically set the charges and then escape the ensuing carnage before taking on the next, increasingly more difficult starship in the next level. Once you've completed the lot, the game loops around. Here's the thing about this game, in both its versions, be it the bog standard computer one played in Bolton by kids in tracksuits that look like they belong on the German national team of 1990, or its swish American Hollywood version played by kids with mullets in Delaware. It is a game that is utterly divisive. There's aspects you can't argue against. Its scrolling is slicker than calm off a gold tooth. The control is as responsive as a fly 5 cans deep into a crate of Monster energy drink, and the central concept of a series of obstacle-scattered spaceships as levels is a bloody cool one, no matter how you look at it. However, what it also is this. It is screamingly difficult. Only the most hardy of souls will defeat the first battleship, let alone its 14 chums. And at times, it's just plain unfair. The obstacles on the dreadnoughts are hard to decipher as being dangerous in your initial runs. They simply don't look tall enough to worry our digital Alex, but boom you will go as you crash into a seemingly innocuous fence that actually turns out to be a communications turret. The game demands that you always move at a fairly quick rate, for if you dawdle, a heat-seeking space torpedo will be launched at you, and boy oh boy you better hit the accelerator or it will blow you up. And when you go at speed, 9 times out of 10, you'll be crashing into the staff room of the spaceship just as they're enjoying their jacket spuds. It is really difficult to decipher what is safe to fly over and what isn't. But if a bit of furniture doesn't take you out, then maybe an enemy pilot will. They will appear out of nowhere, blasting away, and if you're in front of them, you're dead. It is unrelenting, harsh, and will summon primal screams from you that will scare not just your cat, but the cats of many houses away, perhaps in different roads. There's no shield bar on your ship, and boy, could Last StarFighter be a better game if it had a life bar on it. It's just you and 5 lives to go through the game, all 15 ships, no continues. Yikes, this game hates you. The Last StarFighter will ground you down into a paste, swallow you, and defecate you into the toilet if you let it. Yet in spite of this, and my aversion to games that are unforgivably difficult, such as The Last StarFighter, I kept playing it. Despite being ancient enough to have encountered the original Uridium, I never have, so this was a bit of a shock, and just like the reviewers of Uridium, I really enjoyed it. I kept trying, even as I was inventing new words to insult it in a loud tone. Whereas that version of the game, though, got scores ranging from the 70s to perfect scores in the old computer magazines of the UK, The Last StarFighter, this version of it, is very much maligned. It's difficult to find a lot of opinion on the NES version from the time, perhaps it didn't sell that well, but Moby Games has reviews from Pat Contry's Nintendo Guidebook and the Questicle website that seem to be extremely uncomplimentary of the game, and rightly so for the reasons I've already described. And I get it, in a way, there's not a lot to it. It's very much a tape-loaded computer game from half a decade before, and you're expected to fork out 40 quid for it on a cartridge. And when I said it looked tarted up earlier, basically it's put on a bit lippy. It's not particularly good looking, this game. It is not a stunning looking NES title, absolutely not. So why is there such a difference of opinion on this game? Is it because us veterans of the old European computer game war are made of sterner stuff? I don't think it's that. We all know that the NES has its own fair share of tough games titles. I mean, just look at Ninja Gaiden. And is it that home computer players have lower standards? I don't think it's that either. So who knows? Whatever the nationality, there's little question that if you should finish this game on your first sitting, then I know who I want Centauri picking up in his swanky pedo wagon to space pilot school. You. Provided you operate your spaceship from a top-down perspective, flying only on one plane in only two directions, using a 2-button control pad from the 1980s. But you. Anyway, that's the end of my review. So like, subscribe, and thanks, bye.